Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the GMS Magazine, both podcast and vidcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, which is where we put the vidcast, or also in Spotify, because now Spotify does video podcasts as well, which is quite interesting. Probably nobody's watching them there, but never mind. It's quite good. So today is a very interesting day because, as well as having with me the ever lovely and audacious Chris Diaz.
Hey, this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina.
That's the one. We're also joined by, actually, this is like time traveling. I've done this several times in the podcast, and it's very interesting because, Chris, you live in the past, I live in the present, and Ralf, you live in the future.
The future.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, good morning to Wednesday, the 25th of January for me.
My God, we are recording two different days at the same time. This is
and good evening and good afternoon to Tuesday for the both of you.
As I assume you're in New Zealand or Australia or
Australia.
My brother just moved from there.
All right, cool.
Yeah, he was a mill worker. He actually got poached to work the pulp mills. He was living in wine country, but then his grandson got born in New Zealand, so they wanted to move back. So they went back to New Zealand.
Nice.
They are completely pure blood Canadian with Portuguese blood. They've got no Aussie or New Zealand blood in them whatsoever.
But did they get the accent?
No, they don't. That being said, that technically their grandson does have New Zealand blood, Australian blood in him.
Okay.
Because that's where that's where the mother's from.
That's fine. That's fair enough. That's fair enough indeed. Anyway, Ralf, you're joining us today because we are going to talk, among other things, about AI, not AI art in brackets art, because I refuse to call what these things produce art. They are beautiful images and blah, 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 whatever, but I'm not going to call them art. But we're going to talk about actually text AI, which, to be perfectly honest, I think an awful lot of people are saying about how much Mid-Journey and the like are danger to an awful lot of jobs. And I reckon that ChatGPT or BTG or whatever it's called, I can't remember, it's way, way more dangerous to way more people than Mid-Journey and the like. So, but anyway, why, what is your interest in this topic exactly?
Yeah. Oh dear. So, introduction-wise, I'll just skip over, but we'll step in. So, I'm a former academic, former researcher. I worked at universities. I was head of programs. In fact, I'm doing a bit of part-time teaching still at the moment, and now I've got a company as well where we have an augmented reality app for tabletop role-playing games, Ardent Roleplay, and we also develop serious games for education, which is actually where the Ardent Roleplay app kind of came out of from the work that we were doing, which is a little interesting thing which we'll go into because I love talking about education. I think it's probably the biggest passion is probably education for me.
And it's ardentroleplay.com, right?
That's right, ardentroleplay.com.
Okay, let's get that plug out there.
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be all sorts of links in the show notes and the show description. So by all means, people do check it out because it's definitely worth it. I mean, it's an augmented reality app that actually works.
Yeah.
Which is impressive.
Pretty much.
It's impressive. I mean, seriously, it is impressive. So
I remember when Parker and I first talked about it, we set up one of these so you can go back in the archives and find that somewhere. And Parker starts with, now, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm really skeptical about all this kind of tech. And I was like, I did not know that. This is going to be a fun interview. But I convinced him, and he's a big fan now, which is fantastic. Even when he gets blurry from his camera.
My camera is I need to invest in a new camera at some point.
And that lovely focus.
Anyway,
he's got the blur filter. Back to your question, why am I interested? So I think the really fascinating thing. So one angle from it effectively is that, when we talk about education, I talk about the classic three T's of education: teaching, training, testing. Right? This is how we're all kind of used and exposed, used to education. And, somebody tells you stuff and then you do it a few times and then they test you to see whether you got it. But what we really want in education is transformation. What we really want is people to apply the thing that they learned when push comes to shove and they're out in the field. And that's the thing that teaching, training, and testing don't actually do. That the idea is, well, you're here, you want to learn it, so you're going to use it, and we've trained you, so it's now ingrained like a habit, so you're going to use it. But nobody, really trains things often enough for that. And testing doesn't help with this at all, because testing is completely disconnected from how you're in the end actually going to use it, right?
Yeah.
So we've all been taught how to do a good password. We're all trained how to do a good password because we regularly have to create new passwords. We're kind of tested on how to do a good password. You create a new password and says, no, you need an extra character or an extra number, or you've used this password before. But every time that you're creating a new account on some website to buy a present for a niece or a nephew, and you know that in 6 months they've outgrown this and you're never going to go to this website again, you're going to use the same throwaway password you use everywhere else. Yeah. Because you're not transformed in your attitude towards passwords. And what I found when I was an educator in working in universities, the thing that really transforms people is experiencing the consequences of failure safely. Failed safe, right? It's not a fail safe, but failed safely. And that's why I'm really kind of passionate about games in learning and role play in learning. And role play is the first way we learn. So that's kind of one angle on this, right? Getting people to write assignments to express their knowledge tends to be very much like testing. You're putting stuff down that's really quite disconnected from how you're actually going to apply it in the workplace. And now that we've got this wonderful tech of ChatGPT and other systems along those lines, creating written content about a topic is effectively like typewriting out your handwritten notes, right? We've got to think of these tools as tools, right? Nobody handwrites things and then sits on a typewriter, puts in some paper and types it up, right? You're kind of writing in a computer straight away. It does spell checks, it does grammar checks, all sorts of things for people. There's a whole bunch of practical production that's we don't even think about the fact that as academics, we used to get handwritten assignments, which was just a nightmare. Because trying to, read, like, what's that word? Can you read that word? And I think that's there's so much happening now. Same, it's like calculators. There's so many things that this tech steps you up in terms of converting and creating things. But the big problem, of course, with ChatGPT is it does a really good job, particularly because it iterates. You get it to answer a question and then you say, could you elaborate on that part more? Could you make it a little bit less formal in language? And it'll just rewrite it in a less formal language. Can you do it as a song lyric? And it'll do that. It's crazy. And that's really disrupting, not in the funky, Silicon Valley, way. Education, because people can't trust assessment submissions anymore. And there was an academic here in Australia who did a test, I think, of last year of a whole bunch of assignments and found that 1 in 5 had probably used AI to write some or all of the assignment answers of what they received, which is massive. And as another friend recently said, the question is how much human time is going to be spent marking assignments written by AI?
But I think, from that point of view, the solution is actually quite simple, and it's not simple, but there is a clear solution, which is to make sure that the testing after the training and the assessment is actually properly linked and properly carried out. So it's, but I don't know academically speaking, I mean, I don't know how things are done in Australia or New Zealand, or that part of the world, or any other part of the world for that matter. But in Spain, it's going to be rather hard because there's an awful lot of people that will need to be assessed and tested in the proper way. So changing that methodology is not going to be easy at all.
Exactly, and that's kind of the interesting thing. Then is I think our teaching, our assessment, the whole way in which kind of universities work needs a little bit of an upgrade. And honestly, the main thing is it's needed an upgrade for a long time, because I think that teaching, training, testing, traditional kind of approach doesn't actually prepare people well enough for the workforce anyway, right? Because you get there and you just fall into the obvious or maybe shallow kind of thinking way, and you're not necessarily using things. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff around soft skills, collaboration, communication, a whole bunch of things around that. And I think our kind of traditional assessment methods multi-choice or other kind of tests or written tests and assignments is the predominant one. Sometimes some level of presentations and a little bit of maybe participation. Did you engage during tutorials and things like that? And that's where now we're really saying, if you bring in role play as one of these activities during your tutorials, during your classes, you can utilize those role play activities firstly to give students an actually much better learning environment, because you're working through things, and you can then utilize that role play for driving your assessment, because the content which provides the context for the assessment is not going to be known to the AI. It wasn't there during the role play interaction, unless you start transcribing the whole thing and feeding that in which case you're probably doing enough work to learn anyway. And the role play itself, that interaction of the role play itself, can actually be partly used as part of that assessment. It becomes a much more authentic assessment. It's sort of an education term, right? We want authentic assessment. We want assessment that tests what you're actually going to be doing in the workplace, not just whether you read the book.
But that means, though, that we need to train and therefore later on test how the teachers are going to do that role play. Because as we are three role players, we know it's not easy to run a role playing session. And it's not going to be what you're describing. It's not going to be that much different from running a role playing game, for academic purposes, which gives a completely new layer and depth that you're going to have to be, as a teacher, you're going to have to be proficient in your topic, whatever it is you're teaching, and role play. How are we even going to start to implement that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, so that's from where we've been coming at it, from developing serious games for education and things like that, is where it really comes in. And that's where, from the pitch perspective, that's where we are looking at using our underlying platform that we built Ardent Roleplay on, so what we call the Audacious platform, to support that kind of role play. It structures the interactions or the encounters, if you will, for in the way that our app kind of supports. It's still open for people to use it freely if they want, but it also gives certain structures where we sort of say, you've got an early kind of exploration interaction where you're providing context, then you're driving down where you can really see things that are there, then you're doing kind of investigation, and then you get some reveals depending on what you see. You take some action, and then you see the consequences of what happened there. So we take people through in that way. And of course, for us, with Ardent Roleplay, with being AR, it's very much focused on where there are, whether it's gadgets or terrain or scenery or things like that. If you're doing purely theoretical kind of work, it's going to be trickier for theoretical mathematicians to do role play. Obviously, it's just going to apply everywhere. But there are plenty. There are lots of things. I mean, just yesterday I was talking with a paleontologist from the UK who have developed, and they just had a successful Kickstarter late last year of a 5e effectively a monster. Effectively, it's a scientifically accurate monster manual of dinosaurs and terrain and things that are in that era. So you can bring that in as a learning tool, where kids can play D&D. Get a time warp onto prehistoric Earth. Way prehistoric, pre-human Earth.
Okay. So let's
and then interact with things. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start mixing this. Because I, as you know, I work in teaching of sorts, because I'm an instructional designer during my my non-superhero hours. What I would like to find out is, let's say Chris is a publisher of a very successful science fantasy RPG.
Yeah.
And what you're describing in there is also how somebody has used 5e to bring scientifically accurate data to a fantasy world, which is something that I also tend to look at and think, okay, let's see how you do this. Because more often than not, when people want to bring reality into games, is to bring the shitty bits of reality rather than the cool things of reality in games. And when they try to bring the cool things into it, is like this kind of doesn't really stick. So let's assume that Chris, who is a successful, well-respected, everyday better known, really good, very prolific, surprisingly good attention to detail, great customer service, running out of things to say, would like to use what he's hearing from you in his game. Where should he start? I think he will ask an awful lot of questions about this, I'm sure.
yeah. So I think, if you're going to take the work and say, cool, how do we use these traditional role plays in education, right? That's probably turning things around a little bit the wrong way. Putting the wheel before the horse in a way, right? It's in the same way that in that education space, obviously there's this thing around gamification, which is not right, which often is really just making the training part of work somehow psychologically a little bit more addictive. Right? Gamification tends to be, if you do it 5 times, you get a bronze star, and if you do it 10 times, you get a silver star, and if you do it 20 times, you get a gold star, and everybody wants the gold star. And you're getting people to kind of tap into that. That's traditionally what a lot of gamification kind of focuses on. My point, and which I don't like, and it may be that that's certainly how I've seen the term gamification kind of used a lot, and I don't think it's particularly helpful. It's a little bit. Yeah. But not really, right? Because all it really does is it gets people to train a little bit more, right? You teach it, it gets them to train a bit more, and then you still test it. All it's doing is working on that middle bit. But I think when we look at turning the whole kind of learning process around and saying, hey, we want to develop a serious game or a game-based learning approach, what you do is saying, where's the actual kind of application of when you're doing something, whatever that. Well, let's take cybersecurity because it's what you do, Paco, as well, right? So you want to train people in better cybersecurity practices. So you make up some scenarios, particularly where things can go wrong, and then set them up as a story arc, an adventure plot. And then and then you might work out, cool, what might be a good role play system to put that story arc into, right? So you start with the learner is the protagonist because you're trying to take that protagonist through a narrative arc, through a journey, so that they both can experience doing it the wrong way, always nice, and that they can learn the skills along the way. And then you fit those correct skills, correct activities in. So rather than fighting your way through or puzzle solving your way through, say here are the tools that you need to use. Like, right, okay, go the right way. And then it's a question of whether you want to use an existing role play system to really go that deep, to really run it like an actual ttrpg, what we would think of it, or whether you roll it as a lighter role play light kind of exercise, but where it's more of like, okay, imagine you're a bunch of people in an office, you're playing the intern, you're thinking, oh well, I've got to go in, I'm only here for 3 weeks, I'm going to get my account, I'll just do whatever password I use everywhere else because I'm only going to be here for 3 weeks as an intern learning things, and what I have access to isn't important anyway. And it's like, yeah, but if somebody hacks your account, then they can send an email to your boss as if it's from you, and then leverage their way up the chain of command until they've gotten something interesting. But you're playing that out in the same kind of interactions that we do there and that kids do as role play. Now, if we want to work, say, cool, but we've got some really serious and solid systems for role play, a whole bunch out there, then making that an opportunity for there's educators who are familiar with that sort of role playing. Yeah, cool. Well, I can do it like that, but I can actually do it a lot better because I know that there's much more solid and well established and well developed role play mechanisms. So fitting it on that is basically just deepening the interaction. And I guess it's that question of what do these role play systems actually do for people? We could all just sit down and say, hey, let's imagine you're this and I'm that, and start playing it out, right? The way kids do with little figurines. But the systems provide us a structure around what I can and can't do and make those things a bit more predictable. Mm-hmm. And that lets me be able to kind of go forward and do things there. So for a publisher of a system, there would be I guess a question around getting content creators to say, hey, here's a problem, an education problem, a training problem. Here's some training materials, and the big thing here always is that you need to work with domain experts who understand the training problem. Could you create a scenario where that particular training problem is worked through, where it can go terribly wrong? The stronger the consequences, the more impactful the learning memory, the experience is, and then moving up that way.
Okay. Chris, from your point of view, as a publisher with all the qualities that I couldn't possibly dare to repeat again because I can't remember them all after these 5 minutes, how would you see yourself actually using your game for some more formal training? I mean, do you think, as Ralf was saying, that's something that it could be done? How would you go about it after what you've heard from Ralf?
Well, it's funny because I've been writing like little notes as you guys have been talking, and the first thing is the fact that we were talking initially about AI and ChatGPT, and there's been the concern in my industry regarding whether or not we're getting replaced, and the AI artists are louder than the AI writers in this crisis. So it's one of those situations where's my social outrage? But that also being said, in the same way that I keep on stressing that potentially AI art could be employed as a tool by artists, I use Grammarly, which is trained by AI all the time because it helps someone who's a neurodivergent like myself write without coming off sounding like an idiot. And I've been writing a long time before Grammarly, but now that I have it, it's fixing a lot of common errors that I'm making over my life. And the irony of we were talking about D&D or role playing in education, of course, with my age, and I go back to the day of the Satanic Panic, where kids were trying to get into this type of gaming, and like schools were banning D&D. Parents were trying to stop their kids from playing D&D because of this weird kind of vague outrage that was occurring. Now, for me, I went into retail in the early 90s, and I worked it consistently for 30 years. And I only got out of retail about 4 years ago. But it's closing in on 4 years, I think now. And for me, one of the things that so obviously, and for most of that, I was a supervisor. I got promoted to be a supervisor, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I've been a supervisor basically all the way through till now. And so role playing was always an aspect of retail training, because you would say, "Hey, I'm a customer. Teach me how to do this." And for me, it was always interesting as someone who's been a GM for almost the entirety of his GM life. It's interesting to me that how ineffective I am in role playing, because when you're if I'm trying to be the customer and I'm trying to train a trainee, you never get a legitimate, honest reaction. It's very difficult for people to be on the spot, and so most of the time I just go like, "Follow me. Let's talk to a customer and let's have a conversation." And you're seeing firsthand exactly how it's going to be. The other thing about gamification, which is this double-edged sword, is that corporations, any decent sized company, are turning the gamification of their employment as a way of rewarding employees without paying for them. And this has been that double edge, where the fact that like for me, when I was my last job was working for Staples, which is an electronics company. It's just been electronics retail for me for the entirety of my existence. And Staples made that an art form, creating this gamification. They were constantly creating games where the staff would compete with each other, where specifically the salesmen, and I would compete with them, which was always unfortunate because I was the top salesman in the country. I sold more extended warranties than anybody else in Staples, and so I would very often excuse myself from that competition and try to train people in how to do things correctly. But it was always bothering me that, here's the competition, here's this thing, here's the store competition, here's the global competition, and here are your prizes. And not any of them were ever monetary prizes. They were points. There was like, "Oh, you get to have a lunch," and I'm like, that's $20. I can get my own damn lunch. But that was that was your double-sided sword. The fact that role playing, especially in electronics retail or in sales, commission sales, has always had a factor. But what bothers me now is that double edge. People are constantly using role playing to show how to act and interact with customers, and then the corporations are using games in order to supplant, a decent cost of living. So it's one of those interesting aspects, and But as for could my role playing, and the funny thing is, I always believed, because like I said, I was young, and parents kind of forbade us from using role playing. And for me, as someone who is not neurodivergent, it was my escape. And it was one of those situations where I was put into special education because the idea of having autism or ADHD was not a thing that existed in the mid 80s. People thought autism was Rain Man, and then there was no idea of a spectrum. And so I was put in special education because I was failing English, ironically. And the funny thing was that I had a teacher that did some things that are very, very smart, right? Getting me in front of a computer, for one thing. Nowadays, when we're dealing with education, role playing is becoming more and more a popular, or role playing, or just gaming in general, and especially the fact that, at least in Canada, if you have a child that suffers from autism, if they're on the spectrum, if they have that kind of official diagnosis, you can receive from the government a 90% discount on any board game that you play or you purchase. So if you're buying board games for your child and your child is autistic, the government will pay for 90% of that title. I don't know if other countries have that, but that's something. So I actually have friends that have dozens and dozens of games that they barely paid a dime for, because of they play them with their child, and that's a way for that child to interact and kind of gain social skills and so forth. But yeah. So it's as for like my own application, it's something that I don't know. For me, it's one of those situations where I also believe there is room for, because in writing, if I was trying to explain, because when I write fiction, it's very different than how I write mechanical rules. Mechanical rules, you have to write in very specific ways. You have to write, when you're doing narratively, you're encouraged to break the rules. You're encouraged to write in ways that would make a grammar Nazi just sweat. But when you're writing a manual, like a D&D book or something like Ultramodern, which has really no narrative, it's just rules, it forces you to write in specific ways. And so it's interesting that when we move out of high school and out of higher education, and we go into some of these writing paths where some people are writing narratively and some people are writing mechanically, that there is no training whatsoever on how to write mechanically very, very well. It's interesting where when you're trying to create rules, say for 5e, or creating your own original rules for a role-playing game or a board game, there's no class, there's no higher education. You have to learn this entirely on your own. And so if you want to write for games, it's entirely self-taught. There's YouTube channels, but your success can vary. Anyway, that's my speech.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think when we look at, like, say, board game manuals as well, you know, there is that mechanical side, but I think the thing that really tends to help clarify is when you've got those kind of example of scenarios where things get played through. We just had that on the weekend. I played Kemet, the new version of Kemet, with some friends, and there was just one bit where, like, can I move here or not? You know, it just wasn't clear from the mechanical rules at all.
Yeah.
And then when you kind of see that little side box that goes, cool, Susan is here and Bob is there and Bob wants to do this, and and you go, no, I can't move there. Okay, good, understood. That
was the conversation, because Paco got my game finally. I assume you have my game, although it's not in your hands right now, and I don't know why. Anyway, but I've done role-playing games and I've done board games, and having created a board game, I've been writing role-playing games for 15 years. You're right. It's fascinating how different I have to write, because role-playing games, and I was talking about the difference between narrative role-playing, there's a bit of oddly enough, a spectrum. And a narrative work, a piece, I can go entirely on the left and be vague, artistic, poetic. And then role-playing actually sits somewhere in the middle, where I'm allowed to be a bit more creative, because the mechanical side is a bit more abstract. And I've said that most role-playing games don't need to be perfectly balanced. They just need to be fun. But when you go all the way to the far right to board games, they have to be perfect. And so when I was writing the manual for Naramata, I realized how the kind of writing that I can usually excuse with something like Ultramodern, I can't get away with when I'm writing for a board game. And so I had to be very, very specific. And I think I went too far, because I think the manual for Naramata is too big. I think I repeated myself too much to make sure people knew what I was talking about. I wrote the manual writing it for a 5-year-old, and it's a game about wine, so I'm not sure why I did that.
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, one of the things I complain incessantly when I read board game rules is that there is no instructional design applied in any way, shape, or form. And whether we like it or not, repetition is one of the ways we have to actually assimilate content. We need it to be able to, get in our heads that to go from A to B, you need to follow this process. And if you repeat it 1,000 times, then you're going to get it. How you make it interesting. So the first time is, the 1,000th time is just as interesting as the first time. That's a tricky bit. That's a difficult bit. But repetition is something that we sort of lack, as are examples, and even sometimes with examples. I was playing which this was going to be one of my reviews for this week. I was playing last week Precognition. It's a game by Ludonaut. It's a company I am very, very fond of, and they are very good. They already have 2 Spiel des Jahres award in different categories. And it's a game where you actually have to try and predict what the move, or one of the moves of the other players, because you are going to give to the players at the beginning of the round 2 cards to the right, and you're going to give one card to the left. And one of the cards that you have to give to the left is one of the cards that you got previously. So you're always going to get, you give two cards to the right, but you know that one of them you're going to get back. And if you can try and figure out, judging by the cards that the other players have on the table, which one you're going to get back, then you can start to build your strategy. Is fiendishly difficult, as in really difficult to understand how it works. It took us 5, perhaps 6 turns to become proficient with it. And it didn't matter how many videos we watched 2 of them, and how many times we read the rules, and it was 3 of us reading the rules. It was just blowing our minds how to do it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important that repetition is a job for writers like myself. Repetition, absolutely. Repetition's our job. Repetition, yes, repetition's our job.
Yes. So,
sorry, that was a stupid joke.
He says a few times, yeah. But I will jump in and say yes and no. I think don't confuse repetition in that kind of let me just tell you again and again, like the tell them of good presentations. Tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, and bang, you've got a great presentation, right?
Shit.
With cognitive kind of constructivist learning.
Correct.
Right? I work out, I give you an initial foundation, and then I build on that foundation, but I connect the next thing I'm teaching you to that thing I built on, and then I build on that, and then I build on that. That's going to, if it's done well, feel like repetition because I'm connecting it to things. But that connectivist learning isn't just, it's not done purely by just repeating the content.
No,
right? Because I can tell you about, voice code normalization of relational databases, and I can tell you 20 times how that algorithm works. But if you don't have the foundation of relational database theory underneath it, you can maybe parrot it back to me, but you're not going to understand it. And repetition doesn't. Yeah,
exactly, and it becomes boring. That's
absolutely.
That's the tricky bit about how to make repetition interesting by getting rid of the layers of information that you assume people should have obtained and adding a new layer. So what you're repeating is just a threshold. It's not the whole thing.
So can I ask, with Precognition by Ludonaut, which I'm interested in now, did they have like a, the sort of scenario, the playthrough, did they have some things where you could read, right, Bob does this, Susan does that kind of thing in there?
Yeah, and even so, it didn't work for us at the beginning, at least, because one of the problems is that through repetition, we have internalized an awful lot of game mechanics. So, for instance, this may sound stupid, but for instance, looking at the other player's cards doesn't necessarily come naturally. And because the game mixes having to have some cards hidden and having to have some cards shown, we automatically go into, we are not going to look to the other cards of the players. We're going to pay more attention to the cards that we have in our hands and how we have to hide these cards. So I can show them later to the player to the right, but my player to the left, or the one I have in front of me, should not look at them. So there is a cognitive dissonance in there. There is a gaming dissonance in that game that until you overcome it, it is very difficult. And the only way to do it, funnily enough, is through testing, is when you're playing the game. And then you do it again, and you think, wait a second, so do I have to do this? And some member of the table will have understood a little chunk, and they will tell you, no, this icon means this, and that's why it's pointing there, and that icon is pointing there, and that's why you have to do that. Oh, fine, okay. So, okay, but wait a second, but do I have to do this on this card, or can I do it on any card? No. You have to do this one on these 2 specific cards, and then that one you can do in any of the other 3 cards you want. So it
and correspondingly to your frustration, you've also gone blurry again.
Yeah,
but it worked perfectly. It's the good time.
Screw the camera.
It's okay.
So that was a complicated bit of it, but I think it's a good. Actually, funnily enough, it's a good game for what we're talking about today, because you learn how, you learn the rules, you read the rules and learn them. Then you become trained when you actually start to apply them, and then you test it when you actually start playing the game.
Yeah, and I think that's, in a sense, that's really that I guess that's really kind of where I'm going with it, right? It's that sense that you learn by doing, in that way. And an interesting, I don't know if you've ever played The Crew, which is a trick-taking game. Yeah. It's and it's like a training system for trick-taking games, right? Here's a really simple first round, and then next round, and the next round, and every level as you kind of keep going becomes more complicated. But it's also teaching you, essentials of trick-taking games, particularly the group trick-taking games that leads you up. And even with the very first one, you're playing it, even though the first one's almost like a tutorial level. If we take the kind of computer game terminology, right? But the whole thing's kind of tutorial level in some sense, that leads you into being able to do more complex things later. And yeah, I mean, coming back to RPG writing as well, something that I just remembered as well is, I don't know if you've looked at any Japanese tabletop RPG systems in the past, like Shinobigami or things like that. Their manuals tend to include, and are often a larger part of the manual than other things, playthroughs. So it's effectively transcripts of people playing the game as part of the, part of the structure in which you kind of get it. So it's like, cool, here's the rules, and now I can read through, they refer to as playthroughs. So if you look at if you look up Japanese RPG playthroughs, you'll see these really interesting extra things. So it's not about fiction, and it's not about, and you might read it as an enjoyable thing, like watching a Critical Role or something, but it's partly learning, and seeing.
It's interesting because I've seen a few games that do that, and an awful lot of people have complained that, why do I need this shit? Which is like, whatever, I don't know. So I'm interested in going back a little bit into this ChatGPT, because and regardless of what the use of role-playing to actually assess whether people have used ChatGPT or not, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to have to live with ChatGPT and very many other tools that we're going to see popping up in the next few years, especially because, funnily enough, they don't seem to be challenged in the same way as Midjourney and, artistic in brackets.
Well, that's something I've been saying for a while. The fact that one of the reasons why some people in the creative industry are basically a little apprehensive about jumping behind the anti-AI community is that there was no outrage when the voice actors got replaced, or when the writers got replaced, or when music got replaced, because basically every single aspect of this industry has now AI as part of it. You can pay for an AI to narrate your book. There are channels that are constantly, like literally, they've been running AI music nonstop for years, and it's one of those situations where now this situation's happened, and the AI are sort of going ballistic. There's a lawsuit that just got filed last week, and as part of it is just like, this has been around for a while. Why are you just now? It's one of those. It's an aspect of human culture that's being perfectly seen on Twitter, where people don't get outraged unless it affects them personally, and it's a weakness of the human race, unfortunately. And it's an unfortunate thing. But the other thing, of course, dealing with AI, you were talking about ChatGPT. I was doing research for a film, which has yet to be filmed because it got the project had to be halted when coronavirus happened. I actually signed up for the AI companion known as Replica, and it was fascinating engaging with this AI, but then also realizing like, well, and I don't know how if the new ChatGPT AIs are better, but I know Replica is still a long ways of ever trying to simulate to an actual person. And the biggest problem, of course, is that ChatGPTs learn things, but they don't have a memory. And that's always been the biggest holding point for all AI chat systems, is that they can learn, but they don't have a memory.
I wish for that.
Well, at least
yeah.
Because
I think you're taking. Sorry, Parker.
Sorry. I was going to say, I think you're going to find that these things do have quite some memory, because that's one.
I'm just saying that the replica itself, the biggest flaw with the replica AI is the fact that it doesn't have a memory.
And I think that's the really huge benefit of ChatGPT. ChatGPT having this conversation where it refers to all the things you've said previously. I think that's the stuff that's really punching it up. But I mean, if you talk about the like systems like ChatGPT not being as challenged, I mean, the big challenge is Alice and Sparkle, right? The gentleman who wrote a children's book and put it on Amazon, and he wrote it and illustrated it in about 72 hours. Because he used ChatGPT to write the kids' book. He used, I think, Journey to illustrate it, put it together, put it online. Because he wanted to write a book for his daughter or granddaughter. I think it was his daughter. It was more a fun project for that. It wasn't, hey, I'm an author now. But that's gotten huge pushback. And I don't know if you know Jordan Stratford. He's a Canadian writer. He's also written, I think, some things for Vampire the Masquerade, I believe, in the past, if I remember correctly. I was writing about this the other day as well, saying that he fed ChatGPT some chapters and outlines from an upcoming book, and then got it to write a few more things, and he said it was terrible. If you want something that's written like a robot, then totally use ChatGPT. Difficult for it to get the voice. I think we probably recognize kind of voice in text more easily than we do simulated visuals that that's things like Stable Diffusion do. With an expert will say, no, that's clearly not a Picasso, but an amateur will probably go, no, it could be.
But the thing though, and this is where AI, written AI is a bit of a problem, is that we don't know how long that is going to be like that. ChatGPT has a big issue, which is that right now it is closed, as in it's not going out there to read more books. They fed it a few million books, and that is it. It's not being fed anything else. But I think it's a matter of time until somebody, you, Chris, can go to ChatGPT, feed it all your bibliography, and tell it, learn my writing and help me keep writing. And anyone else could do the same.
And that's certainly how artists, who are using AI are using AI, right? They download Stable Diffusion, they run it on their machine, they feed it their existing work, and they say, cool, I want to do something around there. Yeah, that's similar. And then they use that and build on it. And particularly how
that specific example you just gave is something that me and my artist are actually employing, because he does have an extensive library of images. He's been doing this for 30 years, and he also has a lot of sketches, and all of which I have access to because he's been working with me for 15 years. So we've been training an independent AI on his work specifically. Now, the issue is that when they release these things, it's already been pre-trained on a bunch of things. So it's not going with a blank slate. That being said, it has been fed a lot of new stuff, but then I could feed the prompts I want and say, here's what I thought of. And then he can take those images and feed them into his painting onto Photoshop on his end and have it go the rest of the way. And it's a way for us to create more art in a shorter time frame for a potentially lower price, because as I said, it's that, I have a fixed amount of, I have this amount of money for artwork. This is how much I have to spend. You can have every dime of it, but let's find out a way of producing as much art as possible for that money. Because at the end of the day, your time is money. So at the end of the day, it's all about how much time you spend on these things.
And we used to, in the medieval times that happened as well. They were called apprentices, right? Your great artists had people who were apprentices who were taught there, and they did a whole bunch of the shit work, and the things as well.
Yeah.
So,
and I reckon that ChatGPT will get to the point. What I wonder though is at what point are writers going to start complaining that ChatGPT is mimicking their style, or that it is stealing their words? Because let's make no mistake, just as Midjourney has been fed with copyrighted images, so has ChatGPT. Because otherwise, ChatGPT would not have a chance of knowing what Dungeons and Dragons is. And you can ask it what Dungeons and Dragons is, and it will give you a pretty accurate answer. So somebody's fed that up, and I could write an essay. I have literally asked him to do an essay on D&D, and he has done it. So it is taking copyrighted work and reworking it just like any other AI does, just like Midjourney does, and reworked it, in a cloud of words instead of a cloud of colored pixels. That's what's doing. So I wonder how long until that happens. Now, to go back into the training bit that you were talking about, Ralf, earlier, is learning how to use ChatGPT going to be part of the training system? Because I don't think there's going to be a way to stop students from doing it. So why not use it?
Look, absolutely, and oh no, absolutely, exactly, and certainly, I think that's my earlier comment around being able to use word processing software, right? It's just the way, it's just one of those tools that's going to be there. And Chris, that's a perfect example of what you're doing with your artist, right? It's exactly what we're talking about. So if you're teaching artists in the creative industries course, and in fact, that's part of what I'm going to be, teaching this semester. Part of it is, what are the latest tools? What's the things that you're working with here, right? When we teach game design and we do, rapid prototyping, lo-fi prototyping, where you're basically saying, cool, before you make me a computer game, make me a board game version of it, or a physical, not a board game, different type of game, but make me a physical prototype first so we can really quickly work it out, work through it. Hey, illustrated with an AI just so you get a consistent style there rather than the stick figures that you used to use, because you get better immersion when you've got that. It's all around that prototyping stage along the way, and ideally, as in the board game industry, we know, yes, get some of your prototype stuff illustrated, it'll be better, but also be open to the publisher saying, that's nice, but we're going to do it in a different theme. This will work much better in cottagecore than it will in sci-fi. So we're going to make mushrooms and raccoons, right? And be ready for them to throw out any illustration you've done, and if it's big enough, and get it repainted. And that's how it should be, I think, with this, right? We use the AI to illustrate things, and then you get the professionals to do it, and they use whatever tools they do along the way, and obviously the whole copyright stuff. And yeah, I think same with ChatGPT. I think the future of work, and I certainly use it to get ideas, to reword things. Just Chris, as you say, with Grammarly, right? These tools are just part of the new toolkit. And that becomes also part of the education system, that you say, right, and you need to use this to generate, you need to, how in your work would ChatGPT help you get more productive and get more content so you move forward? The danger, of course, is at what point are you delegating it all to ChatGPT? And are you able to actually judge the quality of the outcome or the accuracy of the outcomes to see whether that's valid or not? So there was a cute little video. There's a guy who does kind of reaction. He's a stage magician, and he does, reactions to stage magic and talks about it, what's fascinating and things like that. Not giving any tricks away, obviously. He played a little play with ChatGPT, asked it, what does ChatGPT know about magic? Towards the end, going, will it give away how things are done? And it sort of does. But earlier, he also asked it just what does it know? Who's the best magician? Why, are there any women magicians? He's trying to be controversial, so he asked it, can women be magicians? It said, no, of course they can, and then lists some, one of whom was not a woman.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is, once again, it's the one thing that like there's the one thing with ChatGPT, like it's one of those things that they don't have that human cognizance of knowing, of being able to go, oh, there's this quick going, oh, well, that doesn't belong, right? And there's a perfect example of for me, when I'm trying to create something with an AI artist, and you create a prompt that can be as detailed as possible, and I look at it and go, well, that wasn't what I was thinking. Like there was this thing where there's a character I'm trying to create a lizard race for Amethyst. Oddly enough, we were planning on doing a lizard race for the next Amethyst supplement, and then I bought some Degus, so now we're going to make a Degu race, but that's beside the point. But when I was trying to get it to create some kind of humanoid lizard, there were situations where it was working, but then there's some situations where I'm like, you just have a picture of somebody holding a reptile. Like,
yeah,
that clearly that's not what I asked, because I literally say a lizard person, not a person holding a lizard. And there have been situations where they have a face, and there's like, it's like from John Carpenter's The Thing. There's a lizard growing out of the side of the guy's head, and so you have to kind of go through these iterations. And the shocking thing, and the funny thing is that I've been telling Buck about this, is that if you go to a lot of the AI groups, the push is not now like I want to create illustrations that can copy Andrew Yang, or I want illustrations that will copy this person. I it's a lot more like I want to create film stills from a film that doesn't exist. I want Jodorowsky's Alien, and then they mix and mash ideas together, and it's a fascinating thing to see. But yeah, oddly enough, the photorealistic images, which are not really based off of any artistic image, it's oddly enough, there's been some updates recently where I'm seeing it fewer and fewer. I'm not seeing somebody with 45 hands. I'm just like, well, you got 5 fingers. You're almost there.
Yeah. But anatomically correct is actually one of the terms that is often recommended to be included when you're doing things.
Yeah.
It's funny, but it's an interesting one. It's there are some core assumptions, like I want you to draw this and I wanted you to draw it anatomically correct, and it's like, yeah, and that's a core human assumptions that we get. I mean, I have some friends who've been prodding ChatGPT as well. A really interesting prompt was, I'm married to my father-in-law's daughter. Is that an issue? And and got a very, very strict kind of like, yeah, no, that's really not good. That's really frowned upon. It's like, no, I don't think you understand the relationship between father-in-law and daughter in marriage, right? It's just quite fun. It's like, yep, that was something that you're currently, not quite getting. So yeah, but it will.
Eventually,
they're chains of connection.
Eventually, it will. This thing, I reckon we've not seen the tip of the iceberg yet. We've seen nothing yet. What's
like just
like
the escalation from version 3 to version 4 of Stable Diffusion. It's like I had signed up just before version 4 came out, and I was looking at it going, well, this is useless to me. This is not, I can't use this at all. And then when 4 came out, I'm like, oh, this changes everything. And having it produce what it can, it's one of those situations where I think, and the problem right now is that the AI artists, the anti-AI artists, a large number of them, they believe that they can somehow cancel this technology. That is the one thing, and that's why I want to bring an artist on here eventually to talk about it. And I go, do you like? are you aware that you cannot stop this? Like, are you aware that the genie's out of the bottle and it's been out of the bottle for about 20 years? And the fact that we have music AI, we have writing AI, we have a lot of AIs. I use AI with Grammarly and all this stuff. You can't put the stopper back in this bottle. So what do you do? Even if you manage to succeed at a lawsuit, because right now the problem is that currently Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and so forth, they haven't kind of announced their counter arguments yet. But right now, the arguments that have been pushed forward by the people filing a lawsuit, some lawyers are like, this is very tricky wording, because right now it leaves them up to a fair use debate, which can really fall against them. And if Midjourney and Stable Diffusion win this lawsuit, it sets a precedent where suddenly the battle is effectively over. And of course, we're seeing this right now with who can copyright game mechanics. Can Dungeons and Dragons file and claim ownership over aspects like armor class and so forth, and these mechanics? And them trying to put a bottle and stopper on this, and people saying you can't do that. And now this is falling into a legal issue where it may come down to a legal decision where someone says, no, they released this thing 20 years ago. They can't put a cap back on this thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think we look at Kodak 1975 had a digital camera prototype, right? And it was terrible. And they went, nah, it's useless, right? Not good enough, not going to be usable. 2003, Canon released the EOS Digital Rebel, EOS 300D. And it was the digital camera that kind of, it was the tipping point. The Digital Rebel is the thing where, say, that was the digital camera that where people went, oh, maybe I'll get a digital camera.
Wait a second. Nikon released another one before that. Nikon released
there were plenty other ones released.
Yeah, in the 90s. But I think Nikon was the first one.
But it's the Digital Rebel that they tend to put it down to say they tend to say that Digital Rebel was the particular, because it was closest to an SLR, where professionals would say, maybe I'll start.
Yeah, usually you have a situation where, regardless of maybe, like I said, there's a situation where we don't know the first major musician that started implementing MIDI and music, but a lot of people credit Jerry Goldsmith for being the person that started slapping it into his soundtracks. It's like people are like, oh, electronic music is not real music. It's not an art form. You don't touch it. And next thing you know, he creates stuff in the early 70s, like Logan's Run, which is an entirely digital soundtrack. And a lot of composers, there was definitely an argument about, like, this is sampling, this is not real music. But Jerry Goldsmith was one of the first that said, no, this is something. And he was using it throughout the 80s and 90s, which is the reason why so many soundtracks from Jerry Goldsmith appear so much out of place, because you listen to a lot of 80s music, 80s soundtracks. Like, obviously the musicians from the 80s, they're young, so they were embracing it because to them it was, they didn't realize the history. But with someone like dealing with symphony, brings this to the table. And this is the reason why when you ask modern composers, like if you were to ask Hans Zimmer, who is the most inspirational composer he grew up with, he doesn't say John Williams or Henry Mancini. He says Jerry Goldsmith, because he was the one that really pioneered. So it's one of those situations where, chances are there were probably music composers, they producing electronic music for as early as the late 50s or early 60s. But some people do credit specific people for going, yes, and then this person did it, and everyone said it was okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been going at it for about an hour now, and I'm sure that we could be going for another hour, because there's an awful lot of talk to discuss about AI, whether it is chat or whether it is image. But I would like to change the topic completely and go back to the trending and very hotly debated OGL, because I've been reading. I did a live streaming of the whole of the OGL1.2 that they have released. We are recording this, listeners, just so you know, on the 24th of January 2023. And there is a new OGL1.2 that's been released for getting feedback. And it's an absolute horrific dumpster fire. I mean, it has so many things that are a bit, what are you talking about exactly here? This is ridiculous. But the one thing that I would like to concentrate on, because Ralph, it affects your company directly, is that this new OGL 1.2 claims that people can create things based on the SRD and VTTs as long as they are static.
Yes, it's a very
Yes.
arbitrary condition. It's basically Wizards of the Coast determining what a video game is. I don't realize you were judge, jury, and executioner on what a video game is. It's like, what is art? It's like somebody saying
exactly.
this is art, and now that we have a legal backing of defining what is art.
But even
exactly.
So,
You can describe a fireball. You can have a static image of fireball, but if the fireball travels across the table,
but then,
then it's outside the space.
Yeah, but what happens in the case? Not just let's just say, let's go even deeper into this. Let's just say that it's not a fireball that moves from one place to another. Let's say that it is actually a river, or that it is a flickering of the light that makes shadows actually flicker and move around. Is that going to count? I mean, what happens with your content, Ralph? Because even if the building, you have your card on the table, you point at it with your phone, you get the building, you get the creature, and the creature does this and moves the arm, you have the mimic opening.
Yeah.
Suddenly that doesn't count, and it's not really a video game, but suddenly you cannot do that. So how are you?
And what's really interesting? Yeah, absolutely, and it's really concerning from that perspective. And the one way we're taking it is we're saying, well, we don't do things under the OGL. Currently it's working that out. I think if you looked at some of the early VTT work that they've been demoing for the 1D&D, the Hasbro VTT that they want to bring out next year, a lot of the language that they use is really in line with the language that we've used in the past, right? With augmented reality. Augmented reality is it's AR minis rather than plastic minis.
Yeah.
That's kind of the sense. It has the extra benefit that different people around the table can see different versions of those minis. So if you're seeing, like you say, a house, or let's say you see a chest, one person might do a better roll, and they might notice that it has a bit of a heartbeat. Right, it's pulsing, and the others just see it as a still chest. And we do that by literally showing one person that it's moving a little and might have that light heartbeat, and the other people don't see that. They see a static thing, right? Which is awesome, and which makes RPG players go, my God, I've got I really have these capabilities of my character. The narrative from Hasbro is very much with their VTT, like, we're using, they're using Unreal Engine, they're using particular camera techniques to make it really feel like it's not a video game, it's an RPG. Like, they really want that same, we are recreating this, but they also have animation. Their creatures do the idle poses and all those things. So yeah, exactly. They're very much sort of saying, we're going to be doing this, but you're not allowed within that space. So they're setting some really clear boundaries.
Yeah. So the first OGL, not the first OGL back in 2000, or the GSL that came out in 2008, referring to the one that was released a few weeks ago, the leak. It was interesting because that one was them trying to put a bottleneck on the entire industry. And once they realized the massive blowback, it was interesting the fact that, like I said, we were talking about the fact that there are leaks. D&D Shorts has been talking about them. He had a great video there where he actually detailed exactly who was saying what and so forth. And so we know that there are these people within this company that are trying to speak some sense into executive forums that are just like, oh, no release, this is what it's going to be. And then they get it and they're like, why is everyone so angry? And it was like, well, remember, this is not the video game industry. This is, by definition, a much more community-driven exercise. And that's why it's so much more difficult to pull one off, because basically everyone starts to try to unite. And then with this revision, they were trying to placate about a huge percentage. They were trying to placate the PDF, the writers, like basically me and other people. And now everyone's like, okay, so you've tried to acquiesce to a large portion, but then you're now specifically targeting. And it's interesting too, because the OGL presented the draft 1.2 OGL as a lot of legalese, a lot of legal terminology, and then when you get to the virtual tabletop policy, it's not legal. It's much more wishy-washy. It's got ideas and vagueness because it's not been written in a legal area. So, so right now the VTT, as it's currently written, is not enforceable in any capacity just because it has no legal architecture to it, where the 1.2 is. And for me, of course, although I have somebody right now contracted to do work for VTTs for my books, I don't personally play them, and my company doesn't personally spend a lot of resources on those. But it's for me, I was more worried about what they consider to be this morality clause that they spoke of. And the funny thing is, and I've been attacked, and I've mentioned it with Paco, the fact that I've been targeted because I have been diplomatic, where I've been trying to give WOTC a bit of a pass by saying, like, I understand this, I refuse to rage about it. There are definitely people, and I'm on the side of the third-party publishers 100%. I've never been on WOTC's side, but now, even though the third-party publishers are united, the fans are trying to create division within that community, with them saying, and this has been this push, the fact that if you support Wizards in any way, then you get we put you on the same boycott list. And that's always been very, very, very upsetting. And it's upsetting to the third-party publishers who rely on these systems. With somebody literally coming out and saying publicly that if you publish for DM's Guild, you're on the boycott, which is such an arrogant and short-sighted thing to say. And to say that in the third-party Discord, I thought was ballsy on that person's part, because they did not make any friends that day. But we are seeing this situation where it is upsetting. I'm posting a video where I basically saying, look, I can see working with the 1.2 in its current iteration, but I understand that it's not very good. And that's because I remember the 4th edition rule set. And I remember the 4th edition had this clause as well. It was not as explicitly written, but there was what they felt the equivalent of a morality clause was in 4th edition. And as someone who wrote for 4th edition, who was the first and probably the last person to publish content for 4th edition, I can tell you that clause was never enforced, and at no point did Wizards of the Coast ever enforce that or the termination clause in any publication that they ever bothered to produce. And right now, people are worried about them employing that termination clause. And I kind of trusted them, and then D&D Shorts' leak came out, and I'm no longer trusting them to have our best interests at heart.
Well,
yeah, I think one thing is, we talk, like you say, with the boycott list and the fans, it is a subset of the fans, and a very loud subset, and I think it's a loud minority, and it's always difficult to, you get extremists in all camps.
Yeah.
So it's, what's the impact going to be? And I think I was having a discussion with, a little chat with somebody else. It's when you get a system that has such big enthusiasm and fan base behind it, right? When people get tattoos of your company, then you're good, right? Marketing 101. You've done something well in terms of your fan base, and people get D&D tattoos, right? Just as they get Harley Davidson tattoos, right? You've got a really strong fans behind it. Yep, there you go. Exactly. Yeah.
Just right for Pathfinder. I'm like, have you seen Roll20? Roll20 every year or so puts out a little pie graph that tells you what people are playing. At last count, D&D was 56%. Pathfinder, Starfinder, and Pathfinder 2nd Edition in totality is less than 5.
Yes.
It's
one of those situations where someone says to me, just right for Pathfinder. I'm
exactly.
Like, that's not going to give you money to eat.
Exactly. It's like, well, right for multiple systems. Like, I did that. Amethyst was written for 5 different systems, and writing 2 books for 5 different systems took me 4 years.
Yeah.
And also you have to produce them and print them and all sorts of things without
exactly
selling them. So
I've been calling them to say, but things like D&D is a trademark. and they own that symbol, then they own that name. I don't believe they have any right to this set of rules that they create, what they didn't create, a bunch of rules that they bought the rights to, halfway through its lifespan. And they're saying, well, we own that now. And I'm like, well, you only own it because you paid one company a lot of money for rules that they didn't themselves even technically own. They were just very litigious. And then the 2000 OGL was basically nothing more than a peace offering that basically tell people we are not going to file a lawsuit against you. And now they're swinging it like a club. So from my perspective, I look at this and going, D&D doesn't really belong to them. It belongs to a community because they can't turn D&D into a video game because D&D needs the community to run that operation for them. And so when I look at this, I'm like, D&D doesn't belong to them. And the first way you can prove to people that WOTC doesn't matter to you is to still play D&D without them, because you can do that quite easily.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one. I mean, I think, like you say, let's say Paizo has 5% or maybe 7 or whatever. Let's say it's 5%. Let's go by the Roll20 figures. One way to push back is to say, play something else. Try and get more people to move. The other one is to say, keep playing it. It's sort of these different game strategies, I guess, that we as gamers should kind of look at. Is what do we want people to do? I think the fact that the commerciality of work for third-party publishers is huge. That's a really big problem for third-party module writers to say, who do you write for when there's not quite a monopoly, but effectively it's a monopoly if you could make a living writing for that one, but you can't make a living writing for the others. That's becomes just really problematic.
Yeah, and I would like to go back into that clause a little bit, Chris, because even though that something similar might have been present or was present in the 4E agreement, times have changed a lot, and it is not unheard of platforms like DriveThruRPG or GM's Guild to take away content that they have considered to be inappropriate for their platform. Now, the issue is they don't define what constitute any of the words that they are using. And that is a problem, because GM's Guild got rid of some LGBTQI plus content because they deemed it was not suitable for their audience. So how that is something that has already happened. They have already enforced this in the past. So what makes me feel that I am going to publish something today, then the company change CEO or whatever in the next couple of years, and suddenly all LGBTQI plus content is deemed to be inappropriate or hateful against heteronormative people. What then? What happens if somebody decides to make a game, that cries Free Palestine, and suddenly they think that is hateful against Israel?
For me, I'm working on a project called Heavenfall, which uses, basically tries to create a game setting around what some people may perceive as an extreme case of the Old Testament. I'm like Amethyst deals with allegory, and this is something I've been mentioning, the fact that Amethyst deals with allegory. It deals with sexism and racism, sexual orientation, and I'm a leftist, so obviously I'm doing it allegorically. So in order to condemn something, you have to talk about it. And so, and whenever I get a negative review, you can tell the person's politics quite clearly. When they say, somewhere the term liberal and so forth comes out, but I have to discuss these topics. I have to present them in order to condemn them. Are they going to look at, because I said in my video that I was in Paco knows I was part of the Dice Tower. I was a reviewer for the Dice Tower. I did reviews for them for about 2 years, and I was ultimately let go. There was a big culling. A lot of people were let go for various reasons. Most of the time, it's quality of content wasn't very high, or what have you. I use 4K, so he couldn't get rid of me for quality because my videos were very well regarded, but he didn't care for my content. And the quote specifically was, any video on the Dice Tower has to be able to be watched by a 5-year-old. And a similar quote was made by Apple when they were doing their streaming service. There was a slightly now kind of out of date comment by an executive there that basically nothing on the Apple Store, nothing on Apple TV was going to be objectionable because they wanted to be watched by everybody. And now, of course, we are seeing stuff on Apple TV, which is more controversial, more adult orientated, because they realize that there's a massive market. If they make it just for 5-year-olds, no one's going to care. But there could be a situation where Wizards of the Coast is looking at going, every new customer we get is somebody who's young, and Stranger Things and so forth. We have the nostalgia factor, but we can't alienate the under 18 crowd. So we want to attract all these people who are getting into D&D in their teens, because those are the people who are going to embrace digital. And we may look at a situation and go, no, you have to be PG-13. You cannot do anything objectionable like that. And where I'm like, well, I'm done. I can't produce the content I want. And Paco and I have both agreed that RPGs are artwork. Mm-hmm. And if since they're art, they have to upset people sometimes.
Absolutely. So that, again, that clause, I understand what you're saying, Chris, but about not being enforced in 4E, I think it is too dangerous in the way it is right now to be left as is. It's just not good enough. There was something else that some people were saying, well, that it's kind of standard, but there's something else that really I thought, you are effing me now as well. There's a clause in there that say that we as creators ourselves will produce things that may have a lot of similarities with work that you have produced. And if that is the case, you can sue us, but the only compensation that you agree to take, if it happens, is money. So, and you have to prove that we willing and intentionally did this to resemble your work, which is a bit, wait a fucking second. So I create right now a, spectacle dragon, and you create as well your spectacle dragon, and you change the shade, the shape of the spectacles, and suddenly I kind of sue you because it has an awful lot of similarities, but it is a little bit different. I mean, in the 1.1, there was this clause where they said basically that we can take anything that you create and we can use it however we want, and that's the end of it. And now they are saying we can create something that's only a little tiny bit different from what you have created, and if you prove that we did it intentionally, the only thing you're going to get is a little bit of money out of us, as long as you prosecute within the courts in the state of Washington.
I did a, which is weird because having people come after me saying you bailed out. Like I actually went through the OGL in live, so people watch me. I look at that and go, huh. So it's like, if you can prove it, you can't stop us from publishing it. You'll just get a check. And I was just like, and I made comments to the fact that Wizards is notorious for ripping me off anyway, but.
Oh, there's something else that I found that was absolutely hilarious, really hilarious. One of the first things they say is, this is perpetual, non-exclusive, and irrevocable. Okay, great, sounds good, right? But then at the end, they literally say, we can revoke this license from you whenever we want. Oh, and we reserve the right of actually cancelling it altogether. Somebody miss, I don't think irrevocable means what they think it means.
That should be the license from Paradox, not from Hasbro.
This is the Schrodinger's license. It's irrevocable, but it can be revoked, or partially, because they say, oh no, if at some point you find something in this license that is unenforceable, okay, we will keep going with the rest of the license, not that bit.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that maybe it can be corrected, but then the question is, we can determine what a correction means.
Exactly. I don't think they're going. I think the interns that they're using to write this should go back to law school, and I don't know the American law very well, like at all. but it just doesn't sound like this has one single leg to stand on. I don't know, but it ain't getting any better. I don't think the situation with this 1.2 that they've released. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, it's bullshit.
Yeah, and it's certainly lots of really interesting discussion, and I think as as Chris said, you're on the Orc Discord as well. There's 1,500 plus publishers, companies from very small, saying, hey, I've been working on a system for a while and I may publish it at some point, up to the very large companies, obviously.
The issue with Orc, and this is something which, because a lot of people are confused about what Orc is a framework that allows people to basically create this gestalt this amalgam of rules that people can use and reference and create this massive database of mechanics and ideas. But it ultimately doesn't actually, like someone says, I'm just going to publish under Orc. I go, what are you going to publish? Orc isn't rules. Black Flag is a set of rules. Orc is a is a legal document. And some people were under the assumption that they'll just post the Orc license and publish for 5e. And like, that's not how that works. Like we are still in a fight with trying to determine who owns these IPs. Yeah. And who not own these IPs, but who owns these rules. And them going Creative Commons was a nice step, but they're still trying to pull the purse strings on almost everything else. Like I said, I could publish everything under one. If they took out the morality clause or very specific about what the morality clause entailed, nothing I write would be in violation of it. But once again, this is a situation where I need to think about the industry. I need to think about the 1,000 publishers and creators and people who are affected, because at the end of the day, that's more important.
Exactly, and I think there was one of the articles by Paizo that probably explained that very well around the OGL that people may not get, is they published certain things in Pathfinder under the OGL, not because of licensing back to Wizards, but so that it provided a license for other people to then do things with Pathfinder or create for Pathfinder, and had a clear, here's the rights, here's the boundaries, this is what you can then do, in writing your Pathfinder stuff. It just made that easy that way. And Orc is that replacement. It's like it's not Creative Commons, but it's in that sense. It's a template framework for doing some work with owned content, that you can build on, that you can refer back to. Well, I'm doing it under these, rules. Is what I'm kind of building stuff on within this scope. And it's not Orc is certainly not open D&D.
Well, we'll see how this evolves. It was still interesting. It has been interesting for the last 3 weeks. And I'm sure they will be interesting for the next few months. But we should be saying goodbye, because we've been going on for about 1 hour and 28 minutes. And even if we would love to continue, but I'm afraid that my back is beginning to go, and I've been suffering with my back quite badly for a while because I'm sitting down and I shouldn't. So, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed, Ralf, for being here. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I very much appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll have you back very, very soon indeed.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paco. Thanks, Chris.
And a plug again for Ardent Roleplay, the ardentroleplay.com.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Humans, thank you very much indeed for being there. Your comments, as always, would be truly and genuinely appreciated. And feel free to get in touch with us. I am at GMS Magazine in Twitter for as long as Twitter exists, which is something that we haven't spoken about for a while now. Twitter seems to have faded away. We don't fear Elon Musk anymore, despite the fact that it's still a fucking dumpster fire of a place. But no mind that. Get in touch in Twitter. Email me podcast@gmsmagazine.com. On, of course, I am also in Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. So find me there. I'd love to have you around. Chris.
And this is Chris at DSX Machina. You can find me at DSX Machina on Facebook, on Twitter, and TikTok. And I swear to God, non-Degu videos will be going up on the TikTok It's just the Degos are nice and adorable. Although, and this is something I probably shouldn't admit, but I unfortunately, like, my cage is right here. It's about a foot from my face, and there's a platform that's just right there. And one of my Degus was pleasuring himself, and I was like,
thank God for chroma keying.
It's one of those situations where I have to explain this to my wife when she gets home. I was like, she's like, how do they do that? Well, it's like, well, no, honey. Technically, unfortunately, I got to see how long their unit is, and I feel quite inadequate now, to be honest. But I was like looking online, going, please tell me this is. And they're like, nope, everybody does it. I'm like, oh my God. So get used to it and hope to God they don't do it when family's around.
And I think that is a great way to end.
But anyway, that's Chris from News and Back in that. No, I will not be posting that video on my channel.